In the early 2000s, the supercar world was a knife fight. Ferrari brought the Enzo, a V12 homage to F1. Porsche unleashed the Carrera GT, a shrieking V10 race car barely wearing a license plate. Lamborghini had the Murcielago, midnight in a tuxedo with scissor doors. And then Mercedes walked in with a partner that made the entire paddock flinch, McLaren. The same McLaren that had just duked it out in Formula One with Hakkinen and Raikkonen. The same McLaren that built the F1, the car everyone still whispers about. On paper, this should have been a slam dunk dynasty. Mercedes luxury plus McLaren race car science equals era-defining supercar. In reality, we got one of the most beautiful, baffling, and controversial halo cars of its time, the SLR McLaren. A carbon tub GT with a supercharged V8, side exit exhaust that spit thunder, and a price tag that said boardroom bonus approved. Some call it misunderstood genius. Others call it the world's fastest grand tour in supercar cosplay. Mercedes themselves? Let's just say if you ask the right people the right way, you'll hear the word regret. How did a car with this much talent end up with such a complicated legacy? Let's roll it back. To understand the SLR, you have to understand the marriage of convenience that created it. Mercedes and McLaren were joined at the hip in Formula One. Silver arrows on Sunday, silver-plated sails on Monday. After back-to-back drivers' titles in '98 and '99, the partnership wanted a road car trophy. Something that could say to Maranello and Stuttgart and Sant'Agata, we can play this game too, our way. Mercedes brought the brand, the money, the clientele that liked their speed with a side of champagne. McLaren brought the obsessive race-bred engineering DNA, and one name that carried serious weight, Gordon Murray. Yes, the mastermind behind the McLaren F1. From the start, there were two visions pulling on the steering wheel. McLaren's instinct, make it razor-edged and uncompromising. A spiritual cousin to the F1, dripping with race car thinking. Mercedes' instinct, give customers a mile-eating missile. Comfortable, automatic, safe, and usable. A car you could drive from Zurich to Monaco in one sitting, arrive refreshed, and still gap half the yachts at the waterfront. The result was a front mid-engine layout, engine behind the front axle, a carbon fiber monocoque built in Woking, and an AMG hand-built 5.4-liter supercharged V8, shoved so far back it might as well have had frequent flyer miles. It would be assembled not in Germany, but at McLaren's facility in England, by technicians who wore white gloves and treated torque wrenches like surgical tools. The concept car, the Vision SLR, teased the idea in 1999. The production car arrived a few years later not as a bare-knuckle track weapon, but as a hyper GT. Massive speed, massive composure, and enough creature comforts to make an Enzo owner blink twice. Was that the plan all along? Depends who you ask. What's undeniable is that the SLR became a case study in what happens when F1 engineering collides with S-Class expectations. Brilliant, yes, but also conflicted. Even if you've never heard a spec sheet in your life, the SLR looks fast. That catwalk long nose, the cabin shoved way back, the shark gill vent slicing the fenders, the side exit exhaust that breathe fire just ahead of the doors. It's theater. Purposeful, aerodynamic theater. Mercedes design channeled the ghost of the 300 SLR Uhlenhaut Coupe, the mythical silver prototype from the 1950s that went flat out across Europe with gull-wing doors and no fear. The SLR isn't a retro copy, it's a modern remix. Heritage cues distilled into a car that still turns necks 20 years later. Open the doors and they don't go full Lamborghini. They butterfly forward and up, a dramatic flourish that says, this isn't your neighbor's SL. Slide inside and you get carbon everywhere. A monocoque tub under your feet, woven structure in the sills, and a cockpit that balances race shop seriousness with Mercedes polish. Big analog dials, deep leather buckets, a center stack that looks like it was machined from billet and then taught manners. Walk around to the rear and you'll notice the air brake integrated into the deck lid. Not a decorative wing, but a functional flap that pops up under heavy braking to plant the tail. Peep through the wheels and you'll see massive carbon ceramic rotors, because when you're pushing a car past 200 miles per hour, stopping is a safety feature and a magic trick. And the proportion? It tells the truth about the car before a single piston moves. Front mid-engine, long hood, cab back stance. This is the silhouette of a grand tourer engineered to do warp speed for hours. The SLR looks like a jet that accidentally grew wheels, and it drives like a continent is just a medium-length trip. Fire it up and the supercharged V8 doesn't shriek like a Carrera GT's V10, or wail like an Enzo's EV12. It growls, deep and mechanical, with that Eaton blower whine building like a kettle about to whistle. Blip the throttle and the side pipes bark so hard you'll check the paint on the doors. It's not delicate, it's not shy, it's a brute in a Brioni suit. First impression verdict? The SLR is drama delivered with restraint. It's bold without peacocking, exotic without being alien. It promises speed, but it also promises to carry you there in comfort, which is exactly where the story gets spicy in the next chapters. A car fast enough to hunt Enzos in a straight line, yet tuned to coddle its owners like a CL class. A miracle of materials, and a magnet for mixed reviews. Slide back that long carbon hood and you're staring at a masterpiece. The M155 AMG V8. Hand-built in a Falterbach, this 5.4-liter unit is basically a hot-rodded version of Mercedes' proven M113 block. Except here, it's weaponized with a Lysholm twin-screw supercharger the size of a loaf of bread. The numbers, 617 horsepower and 575 pound-feet of torque. But that doesn't tell the whole story. This wasn't a peaky race engine. This was wall-to-wall torque. A tidal wave that started just off idle and didn't quit until the rev limiter told you to calm down. Stomp the throttle, and the SLR surged forward with the kind of violence that made even Ferrari owners double take. 0 to 60 in 3.4 seconds. A quarter mile in 11.2. Top speed? 207 miles per hour. All of this in a car that still had leather seats, cup holders, and a proper climate control system. And then there's the sound. Forget high-pitched V10s and screaming V12s. The SLR gave you something more primal. A guttural V8 growl layered with the banshee whine of a supercharger. From those side exit pipes, the noise wasn't just heard, but it was felt, echoing off guardrails and rattling pedestrians' coffee cups. Mercedes claimed this engine was good for 300,000 kilometers without major service, a statement of durability that set it apart from the more fragile, high-strung exotics. The irony? That dependability made some enthusiasts say it felt too civilized for a supercar. A Ferrari Enzo felt like a ticking time bomb at idle. The SLR? It felt like it would start every morning, even in the rain. That's either genius, or you're missing the point, depending on your taste. The SLR wasn't just about the motor. Underneath the sculpted body sat some serious Formula One tech. The core was a carbon fiber monocoque chassis built at McLaren's Woking facility, a first for a Mercedes road car. Light, stiff, and expensive, it was the kind of material you only saw in racing cars and hypercars at the time. The brakes? Carbon ceramic discs the size of pizzas clamped by massive calipers. Hit them hard enough and the active air brake would deploy from the rear, tilting up like a spoiler on steroids to add drag and stability. It looked cool, and it worked, shaving precious meters off high-speed stops. But here's the kicker. While the hardware screamed race car, the software whispered Grand Tourer. The suspension tuning leaned towards stability and comfort, not razor-sharp agility. Steering was quick but insulated. At nearly 1,750 kilograms, close to 3,900 pounds. The SLR was no lightweight track toy. It could dominate an Autobahn run, but toss it into a tight series of corners and you felt every bit of that mass. Reviewers were divided. Some praised its stability at 180 miles per hour as confidence-inspiring. Others complained it felt numb compared to the twitchy brilliance of a Porsche Carrera GT. One journalist famously quipped, "The SLR is less like a rapier and more like a broadsword." That was the paradox of the car. On paper, it had the DNA to duel with the sharpest weapons of its time. In practice, it drove more like a supersonic GT cruiser, a car designed to annihilate continents, not apexes. When it launched in 2003, the Mercedes SLR McLaren carried a sticker price of around $450,000. That planted it squarely in the ring with some of the fiercest competition imaginable. Porsche Carrera GT, about $440,000. Ferrari Enzo, about $650,000. Lamborghini Murcielago, a relative bargain at $300,000. The SLR wasn't cheap, but it also wasn't the most expensive. It was aimed at a very specific type of buyer, the wealthy Mercedes loyalist who wanted supercar speed without supercar headaches. Think bankers, CEOs, celebrities who wanted the fastest thing in the parking garage, but also wanted to show up at the golf club without looking like they'd joined a boy racer cult. The SLR was meant to be the supercar for grown-ups. Mercedes thought this formula would crush. McLaren hoped it would prove their road car credibility post-F1. Instead, sales lagged. In between 2003 and 2010, only about 2,100 units were produced, far fewer than planned. Buyers who wanted raw insanity bought the Carrera GT. Those who wanted heritage bought the Enzo. And the ones who wanted daily usability? They bought an S-Class AMG. It was a weird middle ground, too expensive to be a Mercedes, too comfortable to be a McLaren, and that positioning problem would haunt the car's reputation for years. From day one, the SLR sparked debate. On the spec sheet, it looked unbeatable. Carbon tub, 600 plus horsepower, F1-derived tech. But behind the wheel, reviewers couldn't quite agree. The criticisms came fast and loud. Too heavy, At nearly 3,900 pounds, it weighed almost half a ton more than a Carrera GT. Too safe. Electronic stability programs and automatic transmission robbed it of raw drama. Too comfortable. Mercedes luxury made it less of a thrill ride and more of a high-speed lounge. Car and driver praised its stability and insane acceleration, but said it lacked the emotional punch of its rivals. Jeremy Clarkson, never one to mince words, called it an amazing car in the wrong category. The real issue was that the SLR lived in no man's land. Hardcore enthusiasts dismissed it as a bloated GT. Traditional Mercedes buyers didn't see why they should spend Ferrari money on a car that didn't have the star power of, well, Ferrari. And inside the development teams? Whispers of tension between Mercedes and McLaren. McLaren engineers wanted sharper, more track-focused settings. Mercedes executives wanted comfort, reliability, and refinement. The compromise pleased nobody 100%. The verdict from the press? A car that was technically brilliant but emotionally confused. Mercedes wasn't ready to give up. Over the years, they released a string of special editions that tried to reposition the SLR. SLR Roadster, 2007. Same performance, but with the drama of a drop top. Exhaust noise became even more outrageous. A true boulevard missile. SLR 722, edition 2006, named after Sterling Moss's legendary 1955 Mille Miglia win in the 300 SLR, where his car carried the number 722. Power bumped to 641 horsepower, suspension tightened, bigger brakes, and subtle styling tweaks. Finally, the SLR looked mean enough to match its specs. SLR Sterling Moss, 2009. The ultimate swan song. No roof, no windshield, just two speedster humps, 650 horsepower, and design so extreme it looked like concept art escaped onto the highway. Limited to 75 units, it became the true collector's piece, today worth several $1 million. These versions proved something. When Mercedes stopped trying to make the SLR all things to all people and leaned into extremes, the car finally shined. The irony? The rarest, wildest versions that people now drool over were also the ones furthest from the original Supercar GT vision. So why do many insiders say Mercedes regrets the SLR? It boils down to expectation versus reality. Cost versus sales, development costs were sky high. With only approximately 2,100 sold, it never recouped what Mercedes hoped. Image versus legacy, instead of a Ferrari killer, it became a cautionary tale. A car respected, but not adored. Brand strategy. Mercedes wanted a true halo car to elevate the brand. Instead, the SLR left them cautious about building another standalone supercar for more than a decade. McLaren, meanwhile, learned lessons of their own. Just a few years later, they launched the MP4-12C and re-entered the supercar world under their own badge, free from Mercedes compromises. For Mercedes, the regret wasn't that the SLR was bad. It was that it wasn't the defining icon they wanted. Instead of sitting in the pantheon with the Enzo and Carrera GT, it sat just outside, admired but not worshipped. And here's the kicker. In hindsight, Mercedes could have done it differently. A lighter, rawer car might have been celebrated, or a full luxury Hyper GT leaning even harder into comfort might have found a unique niche. Instead, the SLR straddled both paths and stumbled. Here's the twist. The same car that critics shrugged at in the 2000s is now a collector's darling. Back then, depreciation hit the SLR hard. By the mid-2000s, you could scoop one up for just under $200,000, less than half its original sticker. For a 200-mile-per-hour carbon supercar with Mercedes reliability, that was almost criminal. But those days are long gone. Today, the SLR has undergone a full-blown reappraisal. Even the entry-level coupes and roadsters now trade for $300,000 to $600,000 depending on mileage and condition. The rarer 722 edition, often north of $800,000. And the unicorn Sterling Moss? That one is a seven-figure weapon, with sales well over $3 million. Why the turnaround? Because in a sea of modern turbocharged hybrids and silent EV hypercars, the SLR is pure analog drama. A mechanical supercharger whining like a jet turbine. Side pipes barking flames inches from your legs. A body sculpted like a Le Mans prototype in evening wear. It may not have been the sharpest tool in its time, but 2 decades later, enthusiasts realize it's a type of car we'll never see again. A front-engine supercharged V8 supercar built jointly by Mercedes and McLaren. That recipe simply doesn't exist anymore. Collectors now see the SLR as rare, significant, and historically fascinating. It was a one-off experiment, and sometimes that's exactly what makes a car legendary. So where does the SLR stand today? It's a paradox. A car too heavy to be a purist's track toy, too extreme to be just another Mercedes coupe, and too compromised to dethrone Ferrari or Porsche. And yet, that contradiction is what makes it unforgettable. The SLR was never about chasing lap records. It was about owning the left lane, about rocketing across Europe at 180 miles per hour with air conditioning on full blast, and Miles Davis playing through Bose speakers, about pulling up to Monte Carlo not with the flash of a Lamborghini, but with the quiet confidence of a silver arrow that could flatten continents. Mercedes might regret it didn't become their Enzo moment, but car culture doesn't regret it. If anything, the SLR is more loved now than it ever was when new. It's proof that sometimes being misunderstood at launch is the first step toward becoming a legend. So what do you think? Was the SLR McLaren a misunderstood masterpiece, or a supercar that lost its way? Drop your thoughts below, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most controversial halo cars of the 2000s, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around. More automotive legends, forgotten flops, and misunderstood icons are coming your way.